youth of immigrant background, football, and issues of inclusion and belonging in Italy, the Balotelli Generation that has been called, okay? This study, which led to the publication of a book, you can have a look at the book, is there, a couple of copies there, was inspired by two main things, if you want. One was the, at European level, the white paper on sport 2007, the Lisbon Treaty, and how European policymakers emphasize the role that sport can play in fostering social inclusion, particularly among immigrant communities and second and even third generation of immigrants. And this programs from the European community and the Council of Europe inspired a number of initiatives at national level from grassroots clubs and also associations and football associations themselves. And the second source of inspiration is a political discourse that has been characterizing Italian debates in Italian society around immigration, particularly over the last 10 years, but negative discourses. So in a way, with my study, I wanted to investigate it, to some extent challenge these discourses and see what they really matter in terms of issues of inclusion and belonging. Just to make it clear, I come from a political science background. I worked as a journalist for about 10 years and then I returned to the academy to undertake a PhD in the media department. And so I come into football and from different directions, from different perspectives. This is a qualitative study that has been inspired particularly by the idea of the qualitative researcher as a bricoleur, someone that produces a bricolage, okay, who is not afraid to cross disciplinary boundaries, okay? So this is the idea that I've taken from Norman Denzing in particular, okay? The social researcher, a critical researcher as a bricoleur. So questions, heavy questions, possibly light answers. Some of the questions that I had in mind that I wanted to address were quite big. Is football, the most global of sports, the most popular sport in Italy to this day, a driver of social inclusion? Secondly, linked to this one, does it foster a sense of belonging among youth of immigrant background? This question, the second question, is more relevant for countries such as Italy, but Spain, but also Switzerland and Germany, countries that have a more recent history of immigration, if you like, and where sport can play actually a role to contribute to the social inclusion of particularly young people. And the third one, which is today I'm looking more to this one than the others, is the right to play a universal right or a right reserved to the citizen. This kind of question leads me to the theoretical framework that helped me to make sense of the findings of this study. A theoretical framework that is mostly influenced by some political theorists and philosophers like George Agamben, okay, who have analyzed what they defined, and I agree with them, the crisis of Western democracies, the crumbling project of the nation state, okay? We are looking, particularly when we think about migration today, to the shift from the rights of the man to the rights of the citizen, something that was possibly already there with the first major project of the nation state, the French Revolution, okay? Possibly the rights of man never existed. But today, with what we see, what we are witnessing with the migration crisis, so-called, we really see this shift from the rights of man to the rights of citizen. Citizenship rights are fractured. We see a number of categories, several categories being created by the states to define or categorize migrants. We have economic migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, unaccompanied minors. We have sans-papiers, clandestine, undocumented migrants, a number of categories that at the same time define and exclude, create different levels of social inclusion, access to citizenship rights. So in a situation like this, where citizenship rights are fractured, they produce precarious legal statuses, okay? Mezzala and Nelson, looking particularly at late capitalism from a neo-Marxist point of view, took this reflection further, and they defined the border regime, which I found quite a helpful theoretical tool to make sense of what I learned from this study, okay? So they define this proliferation of borders. These borders are not only physical, geographical borders that may separate a country from another, they are also internal cognitive borders, borders that we create by distinguishing people according to the level of access that they have to citizenship rights. And what has football to do with all this, okay? This was what really made me think about the findings of this study. And I will explain in a bit what I mean. But first of all, a few numbers to give you an idea of how migration might have changed the social and demographic landscape of Italy over the last 30 years. So in 1995, 1.7% of the children being born in Italy were born to foreign nationals, to immigrants. Less than 20 years later, it's 15%. This is still today. This is the percentage. This is not going to grow, unfortunately, because in 2015, for the first time in 100 years, Italy had a negative demographic trend. So less people are being born than the ones that are dying or live in the country. Okay? But anyway, we have 1.14 million foreign nationals under the age of 18, and 650,000 are born in Italy. But due to the citizenship law, they are not Italian citizens. And this has a number of implications for children and young people who go to school, they grow in a country, they can do many different things, also play football and other sports, but they are denied certain rights. So they are only allowed to be citizens to a certain extent, okay? And to put all this in a larger perspective, the Italian Serie A, the top football league, is one of the most foreign-oriented leagues in Europe and in the world. 58% of the players are foreign nationals, but only 1% are of immigrant background, born or raised in Italy, similarly to Balotelli, Okaka, and Ogbonna, the three players that I had in my picture at the start. So what we see in Italy, we have a footballing crisis. The numbers are there to say this. There is a trend of decline in grassroots level, which is common to other countries, also in England. But then we also have a crisis at Serie A. Serie A is not the successful and powerful league as it used to be 25 years ago. But despite a number of negative figures, we have, over the last 5 years at least, a positive trend. Quite a solitary positive trend, which is the number of registrations of foreign national minors. This is the category that the Football Association uses for children of immigration, okay? So children that are born in Italy. So there is a growing number of these children, which is also reflected from the percentage of demographic proportions, okay, in football. But despite all this, and despite the claim of the Football Association that they are like a driver of social inclusion and integration, this is not what in reality it is happening. So there are different examples that I may use to show you what the politics of exclusion, how they function, how they work in practice. And I will give you just a few examples of what I'm talking about. First of all, the lengthy registration process for non-EU youth. Some of you might be already familiar with Article 19 of FIFA regulations, okay, about the registration of minors. It was designed following this may aim, this goal of the protection of minors from trafficking from poorer countries into Europe. But in fact, this regulation has serious implications for the level of access of non-EU children in football, okay? At the moment, there are more documents, more identity documents to be produced to have your children to be registered, to play in an amateur club at youth level, in a club recognized by the Football Association and FIFA. And this process of registration takes more time than it is for EU citizens. But this rules also have created a further category. So there are not only EU children and non-EU children, with some exceptions like Switzerland. There are children who are not in none of those categories. And these are unaccompanied minors, so children that are traveling without a legal guardian, without a parent, a relative. You have to take into account that 30% of the children that entered Italy through the sea in 2015 were unaccompanied minors. And according to the International Convention for the Protection of the Child, they are enabled to protection until they turn 18. But being a very precarious legal subject, there are some certain things that they cannot do. They can go to school, but they cannot play football. The Football Association in Italy, and not only in Italy, there are other countries that happens the same. It happens in Germany, it happens in Spain. They systematically deny registration to play football at amateur level to children aged 13, 12, 15. And another category that I found are denied registration are Roma children. They are coming from Romania, an EU member state, but for some reason, at least in Italy, they are denied a residence permit. And without a residence permit, the Football Association doesn't register your children to play football. Okay, so the third example, and this has more to do with the talented footballers. Take into account that for my research, I mostly worked with young players aged 17 and 23 that are not playing professionally, apart a few cases, okay? But the ones that are really talented and they would like it to make it, to have a career in football, are denied this because there is a ban, a sort of quota system that prevents third division, Serie C club to sign foreign nationals. But these foreign nationals are children, these are actually young people, in many cases, born and raised in Italy. So you can see the contradictions there. So some of the players, the young players that I interview, are trying their luck abroad. Slovakia, Slovenia, Sweden, even Scotland. They are not there to become famous or make huge amounts of money. They just want to make a living. How much money can you make to play in the second league in Slovenia? Not much. But anyway, this is what happens, because if you are highly talented, an exceptional player like Balotelli or Kaka and Okpona, you can make the big jump to the Serie A. Otherwise, you stop with amateur football, okay? This is just to show you what this discourse about the shift from the rights of the man to the rights of the citizen and all this border regime, to me, really makes sense when we look at football and sport, okay? So some final remarks. In Italy, historically, football, particularly after the fascist regime, during the Mussolini years, has played a big role, is a powerful site for the reproduction and the representation of national identity in a country that we have to consider is quite new, quite recent in terms of national identity. It was created in the second half of the 19th century, and there are still divisions, geographical and social divisions and local identities. So it's quite, if you want, a fragile country in terms of national identity. And so the football team has played this big role. But what happens? Negative public discourses on immigration are reflected in and magnified in organized football, both at grassroots level with these practices that I have told you about, but also at top level when it comes to the national team. And the history of Balotelli, the personal trajectory of Balotelli, his biography, tells us a great deal about this. So I left out of the scope today issues of racism, which are discussed in my book, but it's something that is always also related to this. I just wanted to highlight a few aspects that I think are, in this case, quite evident in Italy, but are not only limited to Italy. Thank you.